So Tyson Fury has finally broken his silence regarding negotiations for this Usyk fight. He said that he wants a 70-30 split in his favor, take it or leave it, and that for every day Usyk refuses to accept this deal, he's going to reduce Usyk's purse by 1% per day. Now, I seriously hope that Tyson Fury is trolling here, because if he's not trolling, then this is absolute proof positive that he doesn't want this fight, and probably never wanted it from the very start. It is an absolute classic example of pricing yourself out. And whenever fighters do this, they always blame the other side. Well, you don't bring anything to the table commercially. You should be grateful I'm offering you 30%. I mean, Fury could drop the percentage down to 5%, and there'd still be people defending him. And this is a guy who has repeatedly said that he doesn't fight for money, who said that he would fight AJ for free, who accused AJ for many years of being a businessman, not a fighting man. So what do you call this then? A chance to be the undisputed champion, to fight an already established all-time great in the former undisputed cruiserweight champion and unified heavyweight champion in Usyk. And although it might not be the biggest fight in the division commercially, it's still one of the biggest. But yet you're not willing to go through with the fight unless you get 70% of the money. That is the epitome of being a businessman first rather than a fighting man first. The exact thing that he's been accusing Anthony Joshua of being. So all this stuff about being a man of the people and not fighting for money and being a fighting man first and a businessman second, all of that unequivocally now, nobody can defend it, were just outright outrageous lies by Tyson Fury. Now, I've been saying this all along, but I'm saying this to the people who still weren't convinced up until this point. The easiest way to have avoided any disputes over purse splits would have been to have the fight in Saudi Arabia, because in Saudi Arabia, both guys were negotiating their own independent deals with the Saudis. Usyk accepted the deal that the Saudis offered him, but Tyson Fury didn't accept the deal that he was offered. Fury then said the fight must take place in London. Usyk could have put his foot down and said, no, I like the money the Saudis are offering me. I'm not going to budge. We have to do this fight in Saudi. But Usyk made the concession. Usyk made the compromise and said, okay, rather than fighting for this good money the Saudis are offering me on neutral territory, I'll fight you in your backyard, the same way that I fought countless other champions in their backyards. But since you made me miss out on this Saudi money, I want 50%, because we don't get guarantees for a pay-per-view. It all depends on how well the event sells. But of course, Tyson Fury said no. Usyk then said, okay, I'm willing to take 40% if I lose, but if I win, I get 60. So again, this is Usyk willing to make concessions, willing to compromise, Fury not willing to concede or compromise at all. He finally comes out and tells Usyk publicly, I'll give you 30%, take it or leave it. And who's Fury gonna fight instead of Usyk? There is no more significant fight out there in terms of legacy. Yeah, there are big money fights against Ngannou and AJ, but in terms of legacy, no, this is the biggest. And yet Fury cares very little about it. And this is the guy who you lot are calling the best heavyweight of his generation, and in some cases, the greatest of all time. What an insult that is to the true greats in heavyweight history. Tyson Fury is not a throwback fighter at all. Never has been. Yeah, he's a brave guy in the ring, if you can actually get him in the ring. But the way that he conducts himself outside the ring, the way that he manages his career, he's very much a modern post-Mayweather type of fighter. He isn't and never has been a guy who's willing to fight any man born from their mother, anytime, any place. That's the rhetoric he comes out with, but it's all just hot air. The reality is he manages his boxing career very carefully. And of course, it's prize fighting. You have to assess every potential opponent in terms of risk reward. The fact that he wants 70% for taking this risk against Usyk, what does that tell you? He thinks this fight is not worth taking unless he gets 70% of the money. So to rephrase it, he thinks this risk is not worth taking unless he gets 70% of the money. And the reason that Tyson Fury feels like he can price himself out of this fight is because many of you guys have enabled him. You've been calling him the greatest heavyweight of this generation, crowning him the king when he hasn't even fought Usyk. So that removes motive for him to actually go ahead and have that fight, because he's thinking, well, everyone thinks I'm better than Usyk anyway, so why would I take the risk? They're going to need to pay me some crazy amount of money to make me want to take that risk. The only way the fight happens is if the fans en masse turn on Tyson Fury. That's the only way it happens. All of this acting like Usyk is equally to blame, that's not going to get the fight done, folks. How can Usyk be equally to blame when he's been the only one willing to compromise throughout this whole process? And I saw somebody who left a comment on one of my previous videos saying that Usyk is just as money hungry and difficult to deal with as Tyson Fury. And they cited Usyk demanding whatever it was, 90% of the money against Joe Joyce a while back. And I thought to myself, the fact that that person thinks the two situations are in any way comparable is astonishing. When Usyk moved up to heavyweight, he automatically was made WBO mandatory. That meant that he had a guaranteed shot at Anthony Joshua. All he had to do is wait his turn. The Joshua fight offered a much bigger reward, both financially, in terms of belts, and also in terms of legacy, than the Joe Joyce fight. Joyce is not a particularly big name now, but back then he was virtually unknown to the general public. So a fight between Usyk and Joyce back then would have paid peanuts, and Usyk would not have been unified champion afterwards had he won. So what would be the actual point of taking that fight? Unless he was getting some deal that was heavily weighted in his favor. It wouldn't have made sense on any level. The AJ fight was more significant financially, in terms of belts, and in terms of legacy. So obviously, it was far better to just wait for that, which is what he did. And you're comparing that to Fury pricing himself out against Usyk for undisputed? There is no more significant fight than this one against Alexander Usyk for Tyson Fury next. This is literally the pinnacle of the sport, the undisputed World Heavyweight Championship. It may not be the absolute biggest fight commercially, but it's still definitely one of them. It's not some little fight for peanuts like Usyk Joyce would have been a couple years ago. So it's a silly comparison. During a negotiation, you're obviously going to try grab a percentage here, a percentage there. If it's a rematch, you're going to try and renegotiate if possible to get a bit more second time around if you won the first fight. But you're going to do it within reason if you actually want the fight. If the fight really means something to you, you're going to do it within reason. If you look at Alexander Usyk's track record, he's always done that within reason when it came to making significant fights. He fought all the cruiserweight champions in their backyards. He fought Tony Bellew in his backyard, moved up to heavyweight, fought AJ in his backyard. So regardless of what he tries to do in negotiations, ultimately the big fights for Usyk up until this point have always happened. What does that tell you? But we can't say the same with Tyson Fury. All the way back in the day when he was supposed to fight David Price for the British title, he pulled out of the fight and then did the typical Tyson Fury thing of blaming the opponent for ducking him instead. I mean, he is a gaslighter extraordinaire. That fight should have happened, but it didn't happen because of Tyson Fury. Years later, after the first Wilder fight, Wilder wanted an immediate rematch with Fury. Fury said, okay, but then he started gaslighting the public to try and get them to believe that actually Wilder doesn't want to fight him in an immediate rematch. He signed this ESPN deal and he was making all these unrealistic demands of Wilder for the fight to happen next. Then he started getting called out by Dillian Whyte, who at the time was on a very, very impressive run. He was looking good. This is several years before he got chinned by Povetkin. Whyte was constantly on Tyson Fury's case. Fury eventually responded and said, look, if the WBC will put the diamond belt on the line between me and Dillian Whyte, then I'll take the fight. The WBC said, okay, we'll do that. And then Tyson Fury turned his back on the fight and fought Tom Schwartz instead. Now, obviously, Tyson Fury did fight and beat both Dillian Whyte and Deontay Wilder eventually, but only when he felt like he was ready, only when he felt like he would be at his absolute best, and perhaps in the case of Dillian Whyte, when he felt as though his opponent had diminished somewhat. Because in that first Wilder fight, Tyson Fury was still weak. And I think the idea of swerving the immediate rematch with Wilder was to get his strength back, to have a few more tune-ups, to get himself back to 100% first. And in the meantime, he just made up a bunch of lies to cover what he was actually doing. It's like what Canelo did with Golovkin back in the days. He avoided him for a couple years. He waited until he had improved a bit and Golovkin had slipped a bit and then eventually went in and fought him. Folks, this is what Tyson Fury has been doing for years. Even in early 2022, he had the opportunity to fight Alexander Usyk then. Usyk was ready to go. But some weeks into the negotiation, Tyson Fury decided to move the goalposts and say that he wanted a tune-up fight. He just fought Wilder a couple months earlier. What do you need a tune-up fight for? Usyk didn't need a tune-up fight. Why did you need one? He longed out the negotiation process in early 2022 to the point where the other parties like AJ, Usyk, Dillian Whyte, etc. got frustrated and said, you know what, forget about this. This is what Fury does. He had the opportunity to fight Usyk in early 2022, and the fight didn't happen, not because of any fault of Alexander Usyk. It was 100% because of Tyson Fury. that fight didn't happen in early 2022. That's a fact. And so with this latest round of negotiations with Usyk, it's just a continuation of what Fury's been doing for years. It's the same old thing. Tyson Fury is not a coward at all. He's a warrior in the ring, but he's also a pragmatist. He's not an old school fighter in the sense that he's willing to fight any man, any place, any time. No, he's never been that guy, despite his rhetoric. He's very much a modern post-Mayweather type fighter in terms of the way that he manages his career. Absolutely, he's a businessman first and a fighter second. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that in and of itself. The issue I have with it is that he's not honest about it. And a lot of fans allow him to get away with it. He not only crowns himself the best heavyweight of his generation when he hasn't fought most of the fighters in his generation, but he also calls himself the greatest heavyweight of all time. And many fans, perhaps the majority, agree with the former statement, not so many the latter, but still a significant minority. And therefore, this reduces the incentive for Tyson Fury to actually fight the best guys of his generation. Because if the fans are saying that he's better than all of them anyway, and those fights would all be a foregone conclusion with the Gypsy King coming out on top, then he's going to say there's no point in fighting him then. Particularly a guy like Usyk. Tyson Fury doesn't fear anyone, I don't believe. But what he does fear is losing his financial status that he currently has and his status as the #1 heavyweight, whereby he gets his ego massaged at every turn. It's not just about money with Fury. Money, of course, is a huge thing for him, but it's also massively about his ego. And particularly at this stage of his career, where the likes of Alan Babich, who sparred him recently, said that Fury is riddled with injuries, he's going to take even more care to protect his ego. He has been rubbishing Anthony Joshua for years, convincing the public that AJ was just a hype job all along, no good, pumped up bodybuilder, no chin, no heart, doesn't want to fight anyone, lost to a middleweight in Usyk. Imagine if Fury then went in with Usyk and lost himself. All of a sudden, this talk of Fury being the best of his generation would evaporate, as well as the talk of him being the best of all time. People would completely reassess his career. They'd be saying, you know what? Maybe he wasn't as good as we thought he was all along. Maybe he's actually been a bit of a hype job. I'm not saying that that's what I would say. I'm saying a lot of fans out there would take this position, inevitably. Because if we're calling AJ a hype job for losing to Usyk, then if Fury loses to Usyk in a similar fashion, aren't they going to do the same with him? So it's not Usyk the man that Tyson Fury is concerned about. It's not getting punched by Usyk that worries him. It's the consequences of losing at this stage of his career. That's what worries him. He enjoys the big money and he enjoys the adulation, the constant ego massaging, being the hero, all this kind of thing. So if we want Fury to fight Usyk, we have to take all of that away from him until he does. If we can't manage to do that, then I suspect what Fury will do is sit and wait, take maybe an Ngannou fight and some other fights, sit and wait to see if Usyk deteriorates. Watch him fight Hrgovic, Joyce, Dubois, take some damage. Remember, he's got 3 belts, Fury's only got 1. Then if Usyk struggles against any of those guys or loses, Tyson Fury can come out the woodwork and say, haha, I told you Usyk was no good to me. I told you I would have beaten him. This is what Mayweather was doing for years. He set the blueprint. So anyway, that's where we're at with this Usyk-Fury thing. If this 70-30 demand from Fury is legitimate and he's not just trolling, then he obviously doesn't want this fight. It's Spence Crawford all over again. Spence priced himself out against Crawford. Let's be real, that's what he did. And now Fury appears, unless he's trolling, to be pricing himself out against Usyk. Dear, oh dear, oh dear. Shout out to Tank Davis and Ryan Garcia for showing these lot how it's supposed to be done. I'm out. Are you sick and tired of the mainstream mindset? Does the dogmatic conformity and pathological ignorance have you tearing your hair out in frustration? Then don't be alone. Come and join our brotherhood on Patreon. We stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. You'll gain access to my weekly topical podcast where we take more deep dives than Jacques Cousteau on an endless variety of subjects. There's also videos, interviews, live Q&As, as well as a vast back catalogue of previous episodes, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen via the Patreon app or download in high-quality MP3. Connect with myself and hundreds of other members in our Element chat group. There's no contract, no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a Mickey D's McMuffin. Just head to my Patreon page via the link below this video and select the tier called the Brotherhood of Reason. I'll see you over there.